jumping into this or that questions. So this is kind of fun because I wanted to put this up top. I'm just going to fly through and I'm just going to answer them. Okay.
Yep, great.
Podcast or books?
Jeez. Gosh, Chris, you asked the best question.
It's a hard one.
Yeah. So literally last night, I was saying to myself that I've drifted a bit towards podcasts, and I'm thinking I need to get back to books. I have a routine where I do these long morning walks early, and I am listening a lot to podcasts and books on tape. And so I don't know which camp you put that in. But I think if I had to say, still books, but boy, am I really enjoying long form podcasts, and particularly in areas that I feel like I need to learn more or I'm interested in learning more. So I think books have the edge still, but podcasts it's neck and neck.
That's a hard one. What kind of podcasts are you listening to right now?
I listen to a variety of stuff. I listen to some wellness stuff around, I'm 53, so I'm super aware of, like, my kids are young. And so I'm super aware of wanting to take care of myself and staying physically fit enough that I'll be around for when they get married and hopefully when they have kids. And so a lot of wellness stuff, a fair amount of kind of grinding, tactical manufacturing stuff around Toyota systems and lean manufacturing principles and continuous improvement. That's kind of an area that I'm really diving into now. And then there's a great podcast called Hardcore History, which is a history podcast on a wide variety of things that I just love. And I just listened to one fairly recently about the history of the Mongols, which was just, a thing I knew nothing about, like literally knew nothing about. And just, like so many of these amazing history stories, was just totally revealed this amazing chapter of history that was just totally inspiring and fascinating to me. So I love history podcasts.
Oh, super cool. I got to write that down. We're listening to a lot of have you heard of, I forget what it's called, the Greeks podcast or Greeking Out?
Oh, I've not heard of that. Is it great?
It's so good. It's a kids podcast, but it's all about, Greek mythology and so entertaining. My
son is so into it too. So I will.
Oh, he will love it. But we love history, and that one in particular is just helpful, and it's digestible for, our 7-year-old all the way through.
Well, if you love history, look up Hardcore History and do the one on the Mongols. It is a 5-part episode. It will just blow you away.
Oh, I can't wait. That's exciting. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. Okay. Sorry. Driving or flying?
Oh gosh. I love driving. I just had this conversation with a buddy of mine. The idea of having a 3 or 4 hour uninterrupted drive. I grew up in Connecticut. I went to college in Vermont. I used to drive from Southern Connecticut all the way up to Burlington, Vermont. It was about a 5-hour drive. I just loved it. And I don't have that. That is not part of my life anymore, driving alone. I'm flying a ton and I don't like it at all. So driving by a mile, and I miss it tremendously. It's sort of, I'm sure, baked into my, my DNA as an American, but I love the idea of a long drive, uninterrupted on my own. And I haven't had it in probably 10 years, but boy, do I miss it.
I have to relate with you on that one because, again, growing up in Connecticut, my husband, we struggle with this big time because I would travel from New York City to upstate New York where he was going to college. And it was an awesome 4.5-5 hour drive. And I would love it. I actually followed some car through, I passed the exit and just kept going one year. Cause I was listening to music and just totally in my brain. And
I feel like I could picture the light, literally the sunlight, filtering through my windshield. It's it really is these, I can relate to that totally. And that drive up New York State is beautiful. And
it's beautiful. Okay.
Yeah.
Caffeine free.
Oh, caffeine. I'm a huge coffee drinker. You're tapping all these things that have been current topics for me. Just this morning, I was talking to a guy. I was working out in my gym. I have a whole theory about coffee that I think caffeine is going to be a drug that we look back on 5, 10, 15 years from now with a much more optimistic and positive view of it. That it's just a great harmless substance that we ought to be using to keep our mental acuity up and our energy levels up. I'm a big caffeine believer. Love black coffee. Drink a lot of it.
I love the substance abuse piece because it is, I'll walk into a meeting and everyone will be highly caffeinated and I'll be like, I have a handicap. This isn't fair. I need to actually drink caffeine.
So why are you not, is that a philosophical thing? Why are you not drinking caffeine?
No, well, actually now I just started drinking coffee, and I've been off coffee for years, but I just started drinking caffeine because I was so tired and I felt like it was like harming my, my
Your
professional,
performance.
like,
Nice.
exactly. But I love it. It's so true though. It is, 100%. I agree with you. I think it's a very harmless substance that will help us, retain information.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go on record as I have no idea what I'm talking about, but I do feel like of all the things that you could be ingesting, caffeine seems like this very innocuous but highly beneficial one. So I'm a big believer.
I agree. Okay, I haven't had caffeine yet this morning, but I'm gonna do it later. Thank you. Okay, run or power walk?
Well, I ran for most of my life, so I was really overweight as a kid, and when I was about 19 in college, I made a mental decision that I was sort of done being unhappy, and that I wanted to kind of change my life, and I lost 65 pounds, and I did that through running a bunch and changing the way I ate. I became a vegetarian for 20 something years, and I ran for all of my 20s and all of my 30s. Unfortunately, when I was younger, I played a lot of sports, and I hurt my knee, my left knee, and they scoped my knee and taken all the cartilage out. So I spent 20 years running, pretty much bone on bone on my left knee. And in my early 40s, that knee has pretty much given out. And so my running came to an end, which was really hard. I mean, for the runners out there, I think, they all can relate to it. Just is, there's a social and spiritual quality to running that is, at least for me, has been very, very hard to replace. So now it is power walking, which I do a lot of. I do these morning walks, but it is always with this, still, now whatever it's been, 13 years later, this sense of longing for wanting to be able to run. So power walking, but reluctantly. I would much prefer to be running. I miss it a ton.
Did you get I'm not a runner at all because I just have never been a runner. But I was always so envious, and I've tried to replicate this, but in 2 miles, I don't think I can do this, but that runner's zone, I hear a lot of friends talk about, and it's
very real.
It's like meditation, right?
Yeah, it's very real. I mean, I think my only thought to people that say they're not runners is, this is my experience only, so it may not be relevant for you, but I think so many people approach running in this, I've got to kind of go out of the gates and redline my body and go 2 miles and be exhausted. And I actually think that almost gets it precisely wrong. That I in the beginning, the first year of your running, if you start off running really slowly, so slowly that you could have a conversation like we're having now as you're running. So it could even be almost walking, but you're going through the physical motions of jogging. If you do that and you get past that, initial, call it 7, 8, 9 minutes, 10 minutes, you do slip into this groove, I think, which is one part physiological. It is another part almost meditative. And that is an amazing zone to be in. And the more you run, the more you can pick your pace up, and the better shape you'll get in, and the faster you'll go. But that basic rhythm stays. The first few minutes, your body has to kind of adjust, but then it does get into this, runner's high or zone or whatever you want to call it, that really feels like you're operating at a different level. And I also found it, if I was running by myself, to be highly meditative and really clearing my head. And I used to also go early in the morning, and I just would love seeing the sunrise and feeling like I ran 7 or 8 or 9 miles and started my day right. So that's
incredible.
If I could change one thing about my life, it would be to be able to keep running now. I miss it almost every day.
Oh, that's so heartbreaking, Bayard.
It's a little heartbreaking.
It's a little heartbrreaking.
It's a little heartbreaking because it is, it's one of these things. I hear it with other people, but you lose something like that, and it became such a part of my identity that it was very hard to let that go. So anyway, I miss it a bunch. I've tried to fill in with stuff like, do some strength training and some other stuff like walking, but it doesn't quite have the simplicity and I don't know, that sort of Zen-like quality to it that run does.
Yeah, no, for sure. What about biking? I feel like that might be, but road biking is so dangerous. I don't.
Yeah, that's my feeling about it. I think road biking is too dangerous for me, particularly with kids. I think I just can't. Yeah,
no,
hard for me to justify.
I wouldn't recommend that. Well, I'll try it again. I run like 11, 12-minute miles. So
well,
I'll
but slow it down further. No, but seriously, slow it down further and go. Just say I'm going to go run for 20 or 30 minutes, and don't give yourself any distance, but just go so slow that you can, and ideally do it with somebody where you're just talking. And then little by little pick it up, but go take your time with it. Don't try to force it. You'll be running marathons in a couple of years.
Okay.
You really will. I'm serious.
I'll report back. I'll report back. I don't know if it'll be a marathon, but maybe it'll be 3 miles. Okay. Oh my gosh, we have so many. I'll shut up on my own thing so we can get through this, but I'm so interested to hear these. Okay. Yoga or meditation?
Yoga, totally. I think it's great. Can't meditate. My version of meditating is running or walking. But big believer in yoga. Don't do it enough. I think it's fantastic.
Okay, awesome. Netflix or Prime?
Netflix, but kind of unhappily, I think. I just sort of feel like I'm too often just like zoning into something on the couch, and I'm like, why the hell am I watching this? It's just not a good use of my time. But it is a clear winner over Prime. But I wish I had a better resource of somebody telling me good things to be watching, because I feel like I watch too much crap.
I 100%. I totally agree. It's like I have the same issue. Spirit animal. What is your spirit animal? Spirit animal.
I don't ever know really what it means to define a spirit animal. The animal that I feel like I am the most sort of in awe of is the snow leopard. So I think I'm going to say that, but I just, in part because I just think watching those animals live and hunt, and it's just so doesn't make sense with the terrain they live in and how they function and stuff. So I think I'll use that one.
Okay, I will take it. Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings?
I loved Lord of the Rings growing up, and I've tried desperately to get my kids to read Harry Potter, which they refuse to do, which I don't understand. So it's Lord of the Rings by default. But I do have this imagining that I'm going to have this whole next phase with my kids where they finally get into it, and I get to really experience Harry Potter. But I've never seen a movie, and I've never read the books, so I don't know.
You have to. You just need to read them to your kids. And
I'm going to give you my kids' phone number. They don't have a phone, but if they did, and have you tell them that, because they're not listening to me on it.
It's magical. It's magical.
You're killing me right now, because I keep saying this to them. And it's not just me, it's their cousins too. They keep saying to them, like, what is your problem? Like, try it. And they just refuse. So, but I'm with you. You've inspired me to take another run at it again tonight.
I'm happy to send all of ours. We have so many copies in here. Okay. Operator or visionary?
I think operator. But I say that the pause is because I'm not sure I'm a great operator. I think I like to think of myself as being a good operator, but I guess I aspire to be a good operator. That's the way I would phrase it. I think so much of, and this, it's so much of running a business is, I think you have to have a vision, you have to have a point of view, but so much of it is grinding it out and not giving up and keeping your legs moving. And I think I do that part pretty well. I think I'm pretty tenacious and kind of refuse to give up. But I look at some people that run businesses and that seem to have an intuitive knack for organization and prioritization and delegation and hiring great people, and I find myself wanting in those areas all the time. So I would say operator, but it's an aspiration probably. Okay,
I totally understand. By the way, I don't think, well, clearly I'm not in the CEO role anymore, but from an operator perspective, I love operating. I love getting into the weeds and solving problems, even though I'm probably not the best person to do that, right? But I think it's really tricky to do, but I love operating stuff.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. Planet Earth or Mars?
Planet Earth.
Thinker.
Yeah. I love the idea of Mars, but I mean, I don't know. Come on. I'm so struck by the wonder of Earth, all different aspects of it, that I think of myself as being how bleak and depressing Mars would be.
100%. Adventure or hermit?
Boy, I'm sort of a split between the two. We were talking earlier about this sort of instinct to nest with your family and your kids. I have that in a big way, just sort of wanting to be with them and cook and eat good meals and watch football and kind of, circle the wagons with my family. But at the same time, I love being outdoors and in the wilderness and kind of gone. So I think it's a split of those two things. that second part has gone away over the last 10 years with kids and work and stuff. I don't do extensive backcountry stuff, but I miss it a lot. So I think it's a blend. Right now, I'm fully into the hermit mode.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Morning bird or night owl?
Oh, morning bird by a mile. I'm
Like
in bed by 10 and lights out by 10:30 if I can make it that long. But I like to get up early and I like to get going early.
What time? I think you told me the other time we chatted was that you were up at like 5 or 4:30.
Yeah, it's a little later now. I because my kids are staying up later, and so I'm staying up later. But if I was left to my own devices, if I was on my own, I would be asleep by 9 and awake by 4:30. That would be the perfect, my natural rhythm. I'd be, in bed at 9, lights out at 9:30, and up at 4:30 probably, 4:35. That's kind of my perfect zone. And exercising right away, trying to get right into exercise. Ideally, walking or running first thing in the morning. That's my sweet spot.
Okay. I get into bed at like 8:30 these days, but I don't get out until 6:30 or 7. I'm just
what time are you lights out?
I try and read for a bit, but then I like fall asleep in 5 seconds. So I would say lights out probably 9, but that's because I have my Kindle like in front of my face and then I fall asleep. It's so bad. That's like a whole other story.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that too. And do you sleep through the night?
Sometimes. I usually don't, but I usually get up at like 3 or 4, and I really think that's my natural rhythm. I'm just ignoring it.
Up at 3 or 4 and then back to sleep again?
I go back to sleep, but it's because I feel like I can't get out of bed because I'm like, you need to sleep. Just because I tell myself that. But I honestly think if I just got out of bed, I would be fine.
Why don't you?
I've never tried it. I should. I don't know why.
Huh? That's interesting.
It's so warm.
My bed is so cozy.
And I'm like scared that like I'm going to wake a kid up and then I'm going to.
Yeah, that I understand totally.
But no, I need to start that. Okay, almost. Okay, ninja or warrior?
Warrior, I think. Those are two self-congratulatory labels, but I think warrior. I think in my mind, ninja is sleek and stealthy and quiet and elegant and nimble, and I'm none of those things. So I think I'm probably warrior by default.
Okay, last one. The known or into the unknown?
I'm gonna choose to interpret unknown in the following way, and then choose it. Unknown to me are challenging, preconceived, accepted notions. So if that is the unknown, I really don't like sacred cows, and so I think if that is unknown for me, I have spent a lot of my life getting energized by that and by challenging orthodoxy. So,
okay, well, that's a great segue into the next topic, which essentially is fast fashion.
Yeah.
And there was a quote that I read. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she's a fashion journalist, Lucy Siegel, or Lucy Siegel, however we want to pronounce that. But fast fashion isn't free. Someone somewhere is paying. And I think as consumers, we are reading catalogs or magazines or, what is in vogue, and we make our purchase decisions based on what's in vogue today, right? The 90s are back. Thankfully, you and I probably have 90s stuff floating around in our closet. But I think that the challenge is someone is paying a price for that. And what we didn't get to the last time we spoke was, that exactly. I think the fashion industry is a $1.7 trillion industry, which is insane. And women's wear, I think, makes up most of that. But dive into this, because this is essentially, we're both wearing American Giant sweatshirts right now, and this will last my entire life and Quinn's entire life. And there's definite repercussions to our purchase decisions. So, I don't know. Let's dive in, because I'm really curious.
Yeah, I think, yeah. And obviously these are topics in food and in textiles and apparel that are near and dear to our hearts. I think, there's nothing wrong with people that want to be, focused on trend and focused on what's in fashion. And I think that should be celebrated on its own.
It's an expression, right? It's an art expression.
Absolutely.
Yep,
and I think that's right. And I think that, but I'm really interested in what you're kind of getting at, which is the phrase that we use is cheap isn't cheap. And that we've gotten so conditioned in the US around convenience and around cheap access to a wide variety of stuff. And a lot of that's really good. I think we all probably have some kind of a guilty association with Amazon. I'm a big customer of Amazon's, yet I also have 100%. This vague sense of kind of guilt when I purchase from Amazon, both in terms of not supporting my local businesses and my local hardware store, but also because I'm so fully disconnected from how the things that I'm purchasing there are getting made. And the woman that you're referencing is right, that there are a lot of costs when you optimize around cheap. And the question that's in front of us, I think, as consumers is how much do we care about those? And I think there's a wide variety of things there that matter. But for consumers that really are looking to be values oriented, values first, there are food companies and apparel companies that I think are trying to do things in ways that are more consistent and more aligned with what I consider kind of generalized human values, American values around the environment and around human rights and around worker safety and worker pay and compensation and all those things. So the issue, as you're sort of getting at with fast fashion, is that in order for you to purchase a $7 T-shirt at a checkout or a sundress that costs you $29. Now, you got to skirt a lot of laws that are certainly in place in the United States. And so things like minimum wage laws, environmental protections, worker safety, meeting OSHA standards, you can't do those things and produce a $7 T-shirt or a $29 sundress. And you have to skirt some environmental regulations. You have to not pay workers very much money. You have to skirt oftentimes safety considerations in manufacturing facilities. And so I think that, American Giant is really focused on that, which is we think those things are good things. We think consumers should be able to have choice where they've got alternatives when they want to go buy a sweatshirt, let's say, or T-shirt, and make their own decisions and get kind of value from multiple different brands. And we are trying to say, look, with us, I think with fast fashion too, there's sort of this maybe guilt that if I'm going to participate in this, I want it, but I also feel guilty about it. And I think there are alternatives there where you can purchase and support brands without feeling guilty about your consumption of them, that you're supporting communities and neighbors and in jobs that are safe and that people are making living wages. And so I think to me, that is the underlying conundrum about what's happening, not just with fast fashion, but with our international trade posture right now, that we've made a bunch of decisions as a country to trade with trading partners that oftentimes don't share our values. And that is a heavy duty conversation about what we believe and how we're going to interact on the international stage. But those are profound and important discussions that get at what we're doing with our domestic ag business, what we're doing with our domestic manufacturing business, and how we should prioritize those and think about them. So I'm happy to talk about that as much as you like. It's a really interesting topic to me.
Yeah. Well, gosh, I mean, my brain just went sideways into so many different pieces. But one thing, I do really want to talk about the history behind manufacturing clothing wear domestically and internationally, and as that ties to the cotton industry and supply chain. But one thing that you mentioned that I really personally struggle is the guilt tied to purchasing. And I don't know if I'm sure I'm not the only one, right? I mean, guilt for me is, it's really hard for me to buy something that's not tied to, a good outcome. I mean, clearly I know a lot about American Giant. And so there is no guilt there. But even when you go into Anthropologie and you want to buy a sweater, right? I still struggle with that. Then also the industry, I can't remember the stat that I read somewhere, but the amount of, I think 20% of new clothes don't actually get worn before they're kind of disposed of.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So I'll give you just a couple of reactions to
about
that. I think the first thing is that I think it's also important to not like be buried by guilt in everything that we do. I mean, if you try hard enough, you can feel guilty about everything you do. You can feel guilty 100%. About the food you eat, the car you drive, the house you live in, the flight you took, the vacation you went on. I always feel guilty
about all of that.
Yeah, and so I think maybe there's an answer here for people to lighten up and focus on the things that matter to you. And I think we all want to live conscious lives. We all want to make better decisions than bad decisions. And so I think for those people that are thinking about that as it relates to apparel, it's a good one because the apparel industry is really bad. It's got tons and tons of waste attached to it and lots of inconsistent adherence to standards that are probably worth talking about if you care about it. We obviously at American Giant care about that a lot. We think it's a really, really big problem in the industry as a whole. But so you mentioned some statistics. So let me give a little bit of history to it. So about 40 years ago, around 1980, something like 95% or more of the clothing that Americans purchased were made in the U.S. And that meant a very robust textile and apparel industry in the United States. And the nice thing about that, like a lot of lower skilled jobs, is they provide really important glue to communities, urban communities and rural communities. And those are communities that often need them for people that maybe don't go on to have college or graduate degrees, but want to have good, reliable jobs for their families. They provided a very large employment base for people that were coming out of high school or with trade degrees or wanted to work in the trades to have good, viable, long-term jobs. At about that time, we began to create trade deals internationally, NAFTA being one, that began to open up trade with Central and South America and Asia that were essentially the concept was quite straightforward, which is we will be able to access cheaper labor and lower regulations, and that'll translate into more choice for the American consumer at cheaper prices. That is all true. That all is exactly what bore out. There was another target there too, which was a belief that as we began to trade with China in particular, that trading relationship over time would have a moderating effect on China. It would bring China into the first world. And China would become a world player in the first world and share our value systems and become a force for good in the world. What happened was two things. I think on the consumer side of things, that prediction bore out. What wasn't really thought about was when you do that and you evaporate all the jobs that went along with an increasing posture towards free trade. That had a tremendous hollowing out effect on communities, rural and urban communities. And when those jobs go away and they're replaced with social programs or joblessness or a combination of those things, bad things fill in. I mean, you really have, if you care about inner cities or you care about rural America, it's the same problem. But you've got narcotics moving in, you've got people that aren't working, you've got particularly young men that aren't working. And that becomes a really difficult challenge that is measured by, isn't maybe solved by having central air conditioning or a flat screen TV. That if you've got a bunch of people that aren't working and that are living in communities that are decaying, that translates into a lot of hopelessness. And I think you see that in, you look at the trend lines in the United States, they're discouraging. Young men aren't working. There's increasing levels of addiction and suicide and depression rates. And I personally tether a lot of that back to not doing a good job as a country to provide good entry-level jobs to people that need them and that want them. Mm-hmm. So that's one big piece. And the other big miscalculation in my mind is that China today is a much more intractable foe than it was 40 years ago. A much richer country today, arguably is more competitive from manufacturing and military standpoint than we are. I view it as kind of a massive wealth transfer, and that we've just made a really bad foreign policy decision. And so I think our job as business leaders is to provide alternatives to customers. I don't think it's enough to ask customers sort of in a finger wagging manner to say you need to do better, you need to have better choices. I think we all collectively, I think policymakers need to play a role. Us business leaders need to provide good, viable alternatives to customers. And I think that they too have to sort of be mindful of, in this particular area of my life, wherever that might be, I'm going to vote with my values. And that could be, as we discussed, it could be in food, it could be on vacations, it could be on the car you drive, the clothes, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But give consumers the choice where they can make informed decisions in maybe a better way. But the final thing, I'll just end on a couple of statistics that you mentioned on this that you might find interesting. So in 1980, the average American family spent about $1,600 in today's dollars on clothes and shoes. And that represented about 65 items. Today, the average American family spends almost the same, about $1,600 on clothes and shoes, but it represents about 180 items. So there's been a fundamental shift in that category towards cheaper items, much more items and cheaper items. And I think we all intuitively get that. It's like, yeah, it's true. My parents, or when I was very young, we had fewer, better quality things. Great flannel shirts, great sweatshirts, great jeans that lasted for a long time. Yeah. And now I buy a pair of jeans and they seem to fall apart within 6 months, and my shoes don't last, and my flannel shirt's junky. And then the other thing to sort of end on a discouraging note, the average American family throws away about 80 pounds of clothing a year. So it really is this disposable stuff. Now, again, I don't want to.
Insane. I mean, if you think about 80 pounds,
it's a little crazy. It's a little crazy. I think now, to avoid the finger wagging part of it, I think I'm not sure that consumers have been given a great choice. And so, as you mentioned earlier on, we want to make really good quality stuff that's going to last, stuff that you don't have to replace. Make it in a way that you can feel really good, feel like you're contributing to helping out neighbors and communities that need jobs. And then put it out there for consumers to decide, does that make sense to me or not? And I think, I hope that we're going to see that everywhere. You're certainly doing that in food. And I think providing consumers with good choices is a great way, I think, to take a step in the right direction. Because at least in apparel, there have been very few brands that have done that well over the last 30 years or so. So tough for consumers to make good decisions there, I think, oftentimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's kind of fascinating with the just in terms of what classifies as a family, like with us and 3 boys, Quinn gets something new, or honestly, when he was little, we really couldn't, both of us were, starting Quinn, we didn't really have a salary. So we'd go to the second hand stores and get Quinn clothes. Right. Yeah. And then Quinn would outgrow them. And then Nash would wear them. And then by the time Cole got them, 5 kids had already worn them because we got them used, right? So it's kind of fascinating. Whereas if you only have one child in the household, that obviously there's nowhere to go from there, right? So you're donating them, or you're giving them away. But it is there's something, and I think a company is trying to solve for that. Actually, I can't remember the name. I heard about it a couple years ago.
Well, isn't it interesting when you in that example, because I can relate too. I've got 3 young kids too. Is that when you get a good pair of pajamas or a good sweatshirt or whatever it might be, and it does make that journey, and it's great. By the time Rosie gets it, she's like, I love this sweatshirt. It's soft, versus the things you buy that are not well made, that don't even make it for a school year. Right.
Exactly.
It's really, it's really interesting. Yeah,
it's fascinating. Even now I find myself going to, we have this amazing secondhand store in Boulder, and anytime I have to go get something, if I have to go dress up for an event, or because I clearly don't get out much, but when I do, I don't really like spending, something on a cheaper item, like poorly made, right? Yeah. I'd rather go somewhere to like the secondhand store and spend a little bit more money on something that has a little bit more quality to it, right? It doesn't really matter. Yeah. But the idea is fascinating.
And isn't it also interesting? General. And isn't it also interesting when you go into these places and you find a shirt in a secondhand store, or a jacket or a pair of pants or a dress, and you hold it, and even though you may know nothing about apparel, you know right away that, oh yeah, this is nice. This is a nice 100%. Thing. There's just this feel to it that you can see the craft and the material choices that is just demonstrable. It's so neat to see when you find those gems in secondhand stores. I think I'm particularly drawn to things like apparel. Flannel, where you find a beautiful old flannel, a beautiful old yarn-dyed flannel. It's just such a magical thing when you find that. It's almost like a completely different species of clothing when you find that the ones that were made in the 70s and the 80s and the 60s. They're just beautiful.
They're beautiful. I have the same affinity for flannel, by the way. I'm excited about your new flannel.
Oh, we are too. That I'll
So
tell you,
awesome.
boy, you want to talk about some of the challenges about making stuff domestically. That flannel
Yeah,
experience has been,
let's talk about it because I think you have chosen the one of the hardest paths, right? I think in fashion and apparel right now. So yeah, let's jump in. What has been the struggles tied to especially making flannel in the United States?
yeah, I mean, I would say the narrative is choosing the toughest path. And there's a lot of truth to that. There's been lots and lots of challenges. We can talk about any of them. But there's also a flip side to it. It's been very rewarding and it's a lot easier. I mean, we avoided up from all the supply chain disaster that's gone on for the last couple of years. We avoided that almost entirely. So there's been a lot of benefits, and I think the relationships we built over time. It's really fascinating that there's almost a familial quality with all of our suppliers now. That I know them all very, very well. I've known them for a long time. And so there are some things about doing it domestically and close by where there are tremendous benefits in terms of quality, in terms of intimacy and relationships and responsiveness that have been much easier than trying to make stuff, time zones and borders and oceans away. But I think as a general matter, as I said earlier, I think there's been this over the last 40 years, there's been this massive shift in trade policy. And textiles is one, and I think there's elements that are also true with ag. Textiles is one that is very easy to offshore because textiles, apparel production are very high in labor. They're expensive, and we pay people in the United States a lot more than they pay people in places like Bangladesh, for example, or China. And so textiles were one of the first things to offshore. They went very quickly overseas, and they're also easy to. You can stand up a textile factory much easier than you can a silicon chip factory, right? You just put in some sewing machines, and in many, many countries, people know how to sew. So very quick to offshore. And the result was that the cut and sew industry, and then also the yarning and the knitting and the weaving and the dyeing industries that supported the textile industry, by and large, have idled for the last 30 or 40 years. So many of the businesses that have survived have not continued to invest in automation and technology to stay up with the times. A lot of that is that many of these are family businesses that they're not sitting on $200,000 or $500,000 of cash to go upgrade machinery or to train their people and keep them current. Most of that capital and capability went overseas also. So as we got into it, there are real exceptions to that, by the way. There are companies domestically that have been bold and stayed in front of the training and the innovation and the automation curves. But by and large, you find lots of family businesses that are deep in talent and craft and understanding, but typically the machinery is older, is more outdated. In different instances, t-shirt production, sweatshirt production was very easy to get that going. There's a ton of knitwear capability still in the U.S. But flannel, yarn-dyed flannel in particular, had gone. Yarn-dyed flannel left the United States in the mid '80s, basically, and went to
completely everything.
Completely.
Okay.
And the thing about yarn-dyed flannel, just to get kind of geek out with you for a second, is that when you have a woven shirt, like a flannel shirt, that's comprised of lots and lots and lots of individual strands of yarn. Yarn dyed is what it implies. Each of those individual strands of yarn are dyed. That provides all the beautiful texture and color that you think of when you think of your dad's flannel shirt that was in the closet for 30 years. And a lot of the kind of hand feel that you've gotten used to, but that requires a lot of art and a lot of manual labor to dye those individual yarns. And I was really interested in reclaiming that. Everybody was telling me it's not possible. In fact, when I started the company, I either wanted to do a blue jean, a sweatshirt, a t-shirt, or a flannel. I ended up doing the sweatshirt as our initial product because it was easy. Flannel was far too difficult, but I've been really interested in trying to reclaim a yarn-dyed flannel. And as I poked at that for a long time, I kept hearing from people, can't do it. Eventually, I spoke to a guy named James McKinnon, who runs Cotswold, which is a relatively large textile producer in the United States, and is a friend of ours. And James says, maybe we should look at both automotive and some of the stuff that's happening in fire suits, which is kept domestic. And there was a producer that was doing some fire suit stuff, that was doing some yarn dyeing. And little by little, we assembled a supply chain that we were able to, starting in 2018, we launched our first line of flannel. That was the one that was covered in the New York Times, that big long article about that. And each year we've continued to make flannel, but each year some piece of that supply chain has gotten wobbly. We've had to replace. So this year is no exception. And we had to swap out a couple of vendors to keep it going. But they just released, at least the first shipment, I think, released 3 or 4 days ago. I think it's sold out. But there's another one coming in, I think, in another week. So pretty excited about that.
That's super exciting. And I'm living under a rock. I'm like, oh, they just launched flannel. Like, and I read your magazine every time it comes out. So I'm not sure why it's just like a disconnect.
Well,
I got really excited.
Well, if you're interested, go. There's an article, I'm sure you can find it online, called The Annals of Flannel in the New York Times. And you can actually, that article, it kind of walks through step by step that entire year-long journey. The reporter that wrote the article basically traveled with me for a year and watched that whole effort to stand up a domestic yarn-dyed flannel capability. And it's a fun article to read because it's a good little window into American manufacturing and the areas that are still really cranking and areas that have kind of left to rust a bit.
For sure. So I have a quick question on textile and just textile dyes, because I'm just so interested in this as you know, from an ag perspective, right? We're concerned about the pesticides and the waterways, but you know, textiles and the dyes, I think, are one of the world's second largest polluters of water, and I'm sure there's stats around that globally versus the United States and other parts of the world, but what are your what's new happening in this area, and anything you're excited about, or are you
there's a lot of stuff happening
yeah,
there's a lot that I'm excited about. I think one thing that's just important for consumers to remember is if you buy anything that is made within the United States, you can sleep easy at night knowing that those things are produced within the construct and the legal framework of the United States. And so it's got the strictest environmental laws. Basically, you can quibble about whether there's parts of Europe that have, but they're both sort of top of the pile. They have very strong human rights laws, minimum wage laws, healthcare laws. And so you just by buying, if you buy from a local farmer, let's say, you buy from a local manufacturer that's producing in the United States, you can know well that they are addressing issues like, let's say, what you're referencing, which is dyes going into waterways, for example. That's not legal in the United States. You can't do that. You can do it, unfortunately, in places like China, where you hear stories of rivers that are running blue with indigo dye from denim manufacturers. So I think that's, and I think, I'm fascinated right now.
It's good to know. It's a reminder, right?
Yeah. It's just, people forget that. Yeah. People forget that.
Exactly.
I mean, I think that the thing that drives me a little crazy is I get asked a lot, like, are you a believer in raising the minimum wage? Are you a believer in unions? And I always say that's an incomplete question, because if what you're asking me is, should we raise the minimum wage to $18 an hour and require all of our manufacturing enterprises and agricultural enterprises and farms to pay everybody $18 an hour at the same time that we allow Nike and the Gap to go take their production to a place like Shenzhen where they're paying people pennies a garment? No, because then all you're doing is you're going to put further pressure on a source of jobs domestically. But if we're going to address both of those things, then of course I'm a believer in increasing the hourly pay for the trades and for manufacturing jobs. I think Americans forget that all these laws that are in place, environmental laws, human rights laws, safety laws, are laws that we have put in and voted into place as American citizens that we believe are right and good. I agree with those things. They're laws for a reason. And the gap is that we've allowed our policymakers to not require businesses to adhere to them. And that's a strange thing. That's a not a great thing to do to all of us as citizens, because I think the result is we basically little by little are taking away vital, vibrant jobs in places that really need them, while we're allowing big companies to get very, very wealthy, get their shareholders very, very wealthy by skirting those regulations. And I think that's an imbalance we got to address. We got to hold our politicians accountable for as well.
Yeah. Are you all, how are you guys addressing that? Because it is kind of fascinating, as same thing with food in our space, but like a Levi or an example, right? We create these laws and these rules to abide by here, which means they can't do anything here. Yet they can go somewhere else and do it. And it just, it seems like, clearly completely unethical. So it's one of those, how are you all, I'm sure there's a group of you, just like there's a group of food companies banding together to challenge the status quo. How are you guys standing up to that? Or is that kind of an impossible feat?
Well, it's a little bit of both. And so what I would say is that there are a lot of the apparel CEOs that probably come to mind when you think of like American. I'm holding up air quotes here if I'm not on video, but American brands. Some of them I think are really cynical and market as American brands, don't make anything in the United States. They kind of play in that zone, but they outsource to the cheapest, lowest regulation place they possibly can. Others, though, are really struggle with it. There are a couple that probably come most obviously to mind when you think of American brands. I won't name them specifically, but really are trying to think about how do we begin to align more our operating approach, our manufacturing approach with our value system as a brand. The problem is that for those brands that are public companies, they have to answer quarterly to Wall Street and earnings estimates. And the reality is that making things in the United States is more expensive. And so I think it is in the same way, I think it's a lot to ask consumers to say, I'm going to become educated. I'm going to learn about all the brands that I support. I'm going to really be choiceful about the way I spend my dollars. I think it's also a lot to ask of brands to say, with no support of policymakers, with no regulations in place, we're just going to ask you to do the right thing. Because if you're running a big multi-billion-dollar public company and you're trying to move your t-shirt production domestically because you know it would be good, you provide a ton of jobs, and you'd be doing it in a way that's consistent with your environmental ambitions and your human rights ambitions, the street would kill you. They wouldn't tolerate the 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7 cents increase in costing on your t-shirts, whatever it might be. And so, but they're trying to navigate it. And so, I oftentimes find myself in discussions there. I have my own point of view about it, by the way. I think if you picked your favorite American brand and you heard that they were launching an initiative to really lean into starting to reinvest in domestic manufacturing, I think consumers would celebrate that and give a lot of credit to people. But I'm not the one making those decisions. And I think in some ways we've had it easier. We made a decision early on that we were going to be entirely US made. And so we kind of put that wall around ourselves, and now we have to live within it. And so in some ways it's been easier in that regard, I would say.
It's harder to backtrack. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just off the table.
The right way, it's
that's
definitely
right.
easier.
And you redirect your own resources to no longer thinking about, could we do this cheaper if we went to Bangladesh? It becomes, how do we do this as efficiently as we possibly can within the construct of the US and our laws and regulations? And that really changes the way you think about the problem. It changes the way you think about automation. It changes the way you think about manufacturing engineering and how you think about compensating your people and incentivizing people to become team members and to be working not just with their hands, but with their hearts and their minds. And it's just a different framework entirely, and one that I think is much better, but it does require, I think, maybe a longer term view, not just looking quarter to quarter to quarter in earnings statements and Wall Street analysts.
Yep. I mean, I think in general, we as a country need to take more of the longer approach, right? We're kind of getting handed to us. Well,
think about how, I don't want to get political here for a second, but just think about how awful Congress is and how totally fixated nearly every member of Congress is on their own careers and their next election cycle, and are willing to roll over on any particular topic if it aids their reelection. And they are operating election cycle to election cycle and not looking past that. There obviously are exceptions to that, but by and large, I think that's a bipartisan disgrace. I think that there's just a real lack of people that are thinking long term for what is good for the average Americans and what the middle 80% of the country all knows intuitively we ought to be doing. And I think that's true with our public companies too. They really are focused, with a handful of exceptions, on quarterly reporting. And it makes it very difficult to, as you're suggesting, to do the right things for consumers, for the electorate. And I think that is a real challenge right now, that we've got to focus and think of ways to encourage our elected officials and our business leaders to be thinking a bit longer term and better for their constituents.
Okay, what are you the most hopeful about right now with what you're doing? Just in general.
That's an easy one. That's an easy one. I think I really think that I think that there is I think there's a real change afoot among consumers. I think consumers have spent 40 years participating in this sort of globalized, I don't know what you call it, sham almost, and increasingly understanding. I think at the beginning, no one thought about it. And over the last 15 years, coming into sharper focus, like, this is not all great. That if I order a $29 pair of sneakers from Amazon. It's on my door the next day in a box, and I have no idea where this is made. And there's this growing sense of like, this isn't great. And we're looking around at all the discord that's happening in the United States now. And I think in some ways recognizing that we're not doing a great job providing opportunity for communities that need them, rural and urban communities. And I think that generalized awareness is really is crystallizing into a sense that we have to be investing in our neighbors more, and we've got to be taking care of our neighbors more. And we have to know the people and the places that are making things in our country. We have to celebrate them, and we have to reward them with loyalty and with celebration and with acknowledgement. And so I think that trend, that very large trend is growing. And so for lack of a better word, maybe think of it as reshoring. That's coming. And so I'm very hopeful about that I think it's happening in all industries, that people are increasingly aware of supporting the people that are in their towns and their neighborhoods that need our support and need our partnership to kind of help to lift all of us up and get us out of this funk that we're in. And I also think, strangely, that the pandemic helped that along. I think the pandemic with the supply chain challenge really crystallized for people like, geez, this globalized supply chain is fragile. When it breaks, it's really, really bad. And we're kind of over the barrel with China in a way that, a friend of mine that is in the industry said that, here in the United States it's the greatest marketplace in the world. It is the most lucrative, the biggest marketplace in the world. And yet the price of entry is free. We don't make it hard at anybody to enter the US market. And that's something that we all just ponder for a moment, that why are we allowing this to happen with intractable governments like the Chinese government, not the Chinese people, but the Chinese government. And how do we think about that? So I'm very hopeful about how that is translating into consumer awareness around where they want to direct their dollars. I think some of that will happen in apparel, like some will happen in food, and but I think that's on the come, and I'm really excited about that.
Okay, 2 friends or folks that come to mind who would be a good fit for our podcast, and why?
I might go a little bit wider. I'll go one wide, one narrow. So on the narrower side, Sam McGonham, who runs a small, it's less small today than when he started, but a small community market here in San Francisco. And Sam is one of the most innovative, forward-looking people as it relates to this topic about how you think about operating within a network of neighbors and partners. And he's built a great business in the back of that. And he is a real visionary, and also about the kindest, most thoughtful human being I know. And so he'd be a great guest. And then maybe another in a very different zone is Shaka Senghor. And Shaka is a dear friend of mine, and is a guy that grew up in a tough situation in Detroit, and ended up through a series of kind of young mistakes, being sent to prison. He killed a person in Detroit and was sent away for 20 something years, and spent a lot of that time in solitary confinement, spent a lot of time coming to grips with what he'd done, and wrote a book while he was incarcerated called Righting My Wrongs. And writing is like writing a book, Righting My Wrongs. And Shaka is, a deeply thoughtful human being about the things that we are facing as citizens, as people, as friends, as neighbors, and I think understands better than anybody the importance of forgiveness and the importance of moving past this sort of judging cancel culture that we're in, and coming from a man that has every right in the world to be bitter and judging, and he's the opposite of that. And I think he's just an example that I find deeply inspiring whenever I have difficult life decisions that I need to talk to somebody about navigating them. He is just this incredible guide and thought partner, and I'm just a deep admirer of his and grateful for his friendship. And I think he'd be another great person to have on the podcast.
That I would love introductions to both of them. Bayard.
I'd be happy to do that.
That they both sound amazing.
Yeah.
I need a friend to guide me
Yeah.
through some of this bullshit.
They're both in different ways, but Shaka really is. He's almost like a monk. I mean, he is an incredibly thoughtful, smart, insightful person that I just find myself gravitating towards when I'm struggling with something.
Okay, that would be amazing. Where can our listeners support you in all your efforts? Social, website, Instagram?
Oh boy. I mean, it's all great. I think that, following us on Instagram, sending in a nice note to our customer service team, buying a product, it all matters. Listening to this podcast, I think it all helps. And just hopefully awakening up a bit of a spirit in deciding to direct your dollars towards things that matter to you. And that doesn't need to be to American Giant. That can be to Quinn or any other brand out there you admire, but maybe being a bit more conscious about how your purchasing decisions in some ways are the most powerful decisions you make. And you choose what matters to you as a consumer. It doesn't matter much to me, but be thoughtful about how you direct your dollars and maybe recognize the men and women that are behind them, because there's a lot of great, talented, people out there that are doing great work that oftentimes are not celebrated as much as they should be. So I guess I'd say it that way.
Thanks, Bayard. That's really well said.
Thanks, Absolutely. Kristy. It's always great talking to you.